uh, to begin with, I had a reading this morning, but I decided it's a reading I've wanted to read for a long time, but it's long. And so I'm going to cut it and not read it this morning, but you can count on hearing it at some time in the future. And by the way, Harry,
Yeah.
MIT has a terrific computer department. You might investigate that sometime.
How kind of you, Bob. Thank you.
My talk this morning is titled, My Grandmother's God. Upon reflection, it was like that line from The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe. Once upon a midnight clear, while I pondered weak and weary, the hour was late and I was very tired. The curtains were still open, and as I sat watching the rain spatter on the drive, my thoughts drifted to my maternal grandmother. She was a kind and gentle lady with enormous capacity for forgiving. Perhaps that's the way we all remember our grannies, but her ability to make me feel loved and secure remains prominent in my recollection. Grandmother was a deeply religious woman, but she seemed quite content, as she would say, to mind her own business. I suppose you could say she lived her religion without ever preaching her religion. I can remember fondly snuggling in my granny's lap while she told me stories of Jesus and God. She made him feel so real and comforting. I expected him to come in from the other room and take my hand at any minute. My childhood knew with certainty that God would answer all of my prayers. I remember the bedtime recitation, if I should die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take. And I believe that was absolutely true. The figure in Granny's stories was just as real as my parents or my friends or even my pet. Jesus would always be my comfort when I was scared of the dark. And the Lord would always answer my prayers. He did, however, just scare me. He frightened me. His image was very threatening. And when I was bad, which I was bad a lot, I was afraid he would smite me. I said bad words. I'm sure I cheated at board games. And I know that I lied to my parents to stay out of trouble. I think I also stole a few things. But God was always there, and he always made me feel guilty. At times, I was quite sure that I was hell-bound. Even today, when I think back on those childhood moments, I feel a sense of warmth by remembering Granny's memories. She made God an easy, simple God of making everything okay for a curious 6-year-old. There was never a question about his authenticity or his omnipotent power. My questions always had to do with how, when, and of course, where. Sometimes I miss those days of absolutes and of course of my granny's her soft lap. I suppose I even miss that God that looks after all people and answers all prayers, even if they were answered in mysterious ways. Now, I don't remember when God departed my life, leaving me with more questions than answers. I also don't remember that jolly round man in the red suit when he stopped bringing me toys, or the bunny who stopped bringing me candy, or even the tooth fairy who stopped taking my teeth and leaving me with a nickel or a quarter. But they all went the way of childhood dreams. With some insight into my past, I am sure that I held on to the toy guy, the tooth guy, and the bunny rabbit as long as I possibly could. There was such a childlike level of comfort in that early God, though. And at times in my life, even today, I wish those stories were true. Granny's God is gone now, long gone. And my grandmother is gone too. But the warmth I feel from those early memories is still quite real. That may also explain why some people have such a difficult time giving up that idea of a personal God. For a long time, it was hard for me to separate Granny from God because they were both so interconnected in my childhood. To give up God, it must have been a bit like devaluing Granny, but God had to go. And I am left with the adult realization that my grandmother's portrayal of God does not fit the world I have come to know. There's no way that I can reconcile Granny's God with such things as the genocide in Darfur or in Sudan, or the ethnic cleansing in Rwanda or the Balkans, or even Mr. Putin, and Lord knows how many other hot spots on the globe. There's no way to reconcile Granny's God with any war, atrocity, starvation, degradation, manipulation, or enslavement of any of humanity. Closer to home, I cannot even reconcile Granny's God with local neglected children, the homeless that live under the bridge, or the greedy, lying politicians on the nightly news. I just don't buy that God works in mysterious ways, or we can never know God's plan. So the idea of a personal God has very little relevance in my life. There's been a conceptual change in my thinking. You might even say a paradigm shift. We seem to have difficulty, some of us, even saying the word God in context of some omnipotent being. When I've tried to replace the word God with the mystery or the force, all I get back is confused stares. So I tend not to say anything. It is strange, though, when you let go of this idea of your personal God, you seem to be letting go of a lot more. You're letting go of an entire ancestral belief in that of a personal God. In his belief quest, Buckminster Fuller wrote the following explanation in his No More Secondhand God. And he writes, God to me is a verb, not a noun, not a proper or improper noun. God is the articulation, not the art, either objective or subjective. God is loving, not the abstraction of love, either commanded or entreated. God is knowledge dynamic, not legislative code, not proclamation law, not academic dogma, not ecclesiastical canon. Oh yes, God is a verb, the most active, connoting the vast harmonic order of the universe from chaoses of energy, close quote. This is certainly in contrast to my grandmother's anthropomorphic Superman. It's easier to speak in metaphoric terms than in vague, elusive, non-tangible concepts. So we cling to the concrete, even if the concrete is metaphorical. By making the unknown into human form, we can have a sense of comfort in the vastness. Nevertheless, when we look at the stories of God and religions with our 21st century brains, we can only rationally conclude that the development and belief in all organized religions and God is based on secondhand information. In other words, religions passed on as fact of what someone else reported that they experienced. It is entirely time that we base our spirituality on direct experience rather than on hearsay. A religious concept based on direct experience would not be entangled with historic trappings of dogma, canon law, or personal interpretation of a few select men with agendas. Rationality would tell us that God is not a cosmic blur in human form, but something to be experienced directly. The noted philosopher and mathematician Alfred North Whitehead said that the most important question facing modern man is, what do we mean when we think of the word symbol God? After all, it affects our entire concept of living. What is life? The meaning of life? What is afterlife? Grandmother had a very concrete image of God, a great cosmic man. She was very sure that the meaning of life was all about doing God's work. And after death, if we did God's work, we would all go to heaven. All the energy that gets labeled God's work is really man's work. So I see life as a continuous process of doing man's work to move our species closer to a more humane existence. In August of 1993, the world's Parliament of Religion met in Chicago. There were approximately 6,000 delegates. The theme of the meeting was World Peace Through Religion. At the opening session, a fight broke out between the various religious delegates when they began to talk about God. It became glaringly obvious that the various factions could not even begin to agree on who God is or what God is. In angry protest, many of the Jewish delegation stomped out, followed by a very large portion of the Islamic delegation. The hardcore fundamentalists had no reason to stomp out because they refused to attend in the first place. God is such an ingrained issue in the lives of some people that we are willing to kill for our concept of God. That the arguments got started in the first place when the Taoist and the Buddhist delegation began to giggle at the idea of God being a man. The critical distinction between Eastern and Western philosophy is the anthropomorphic image of God versus God being a word symbol for the dynamic forces in the natural world. Perhaps the most interesting caveat of this story is the fact that at the first World Parliament of Religion, over 100 years ago, in the keynote address, the president of the organization declared that the various religions would never again make war on each other. How tragic that proclamation did not come to pass. How tragic that the word symbol for God has been for millennia a war cry as much as it has been a comfort. For all of our thousands of gods we seem to be no better off. Since we project on our God such traits as peace and love and stability, you would think that by now we would have incorporated these ideas into the core of our being. Our primitive ancestors did not think as we think today. In most primal languages, there are no words for things like think, reason, mind, mental, or creative thought. Everything was dictated by God. If I killed someone, it was the will of God. If I fell in love, God made it happen. Or even if we went to war, it was the fault of the gods. If I fell in love, God made it happen. If we went to war, God made it happen. And often we mortals were caught between conflicting gods. We might appease one and be the victim of another. Early brains interpreted our thoughts as being messages from gods. This can easily be seen in the writings of Homer's Iliad and the Odyssey. Early man felt he was at the mercy of gods, and the idea of free will was a long time coming in our evolutionary journey. Today, in our 21st century, there are still millions of people who feel that everything is the will of God. The concept of randomness and free will occupies very little room in their world. It's really not strange at all that I associate so closely my grandmother with God. This phenomena has been evident for thousands of years. Virtually every known society throughout human history has believed in an afterlife. When someone died, they were believed to be on the other side alive. Most ancient cultures buried people as if they were alive or would be alive when they reached the other side. Many were buried standing up, and almost all were buried with articles for trade or gift once they reached the other side. Feeding pots were often placed in the tomb, and in some cultures, feeding tubes were placed in the tomb so that the person could receive their daily ration of grain and a pint of beer. Because our human brains were less developed, and our two hemispheres were more loosely connected, these gods were not silent. When one half of the brain was communicating with the other half, it sounded like voices in our heads, specifically like gods from the other side talking to us. So we often ask these gods to intercede for us in matters of love, marital issues, financial problems, and political matters. It was not only the foundation of our ancestral worship, but it was also the basis of our prayers. We ask God or gods on the other side to monitor and fulfill our needs. As our brain and consciousness became more involved, our dad and the God became increasingly more separated. As religions became more powerful, they became the gatekeepers to the gods. You come to church, temple, synagogue, so that they could intercede for you with the gods. We already had this anthropomorphic notion of gods in place because of ancestral worship. So the transition to organized religion was pretty easy. Organized religions have, in many respects, eliminated direct contact with the eternal. Salvation, by their definition, can be found only through the church. Thus, churches have grown and prospered. You might say that churches were the first organization to take advantage of the middleman prophet. The great Zen master Suzuki said, "If you cannot find the ultimate meaning of your existence in doing the dishes and chopping wood, you will never find it." The mystery surrounds us. The word symbol for that mystery is often God. But whatever you choose to call the mystery is still the mystery. Meister Eckhart, the 13th century Christian mystic, said, "Looking for God is like sitting on an ox, looking for an ox." Though we may at times miss the certainty of our grandmother's God, the simplicity and absoluteness of that way of thinking, the freedom to think is liberating. The fact that we have far more questions than answers inspires us to a lifelong search. I personally have never been anything but a heretic. A heretic is simply a questioner. I will take that label anytime. Questioners are not satisfied to sleepwalk through the days. They are not fulfilled with idle chatter that rattles incessantly and aimlessly like seeds in a gourd. They want the truth of how and when and why. The security of ancient prattle gives them no comfort. I just love the comfort of my grandmother's caring laugh, just as I admire her unwavering faith in God. But I think she would love my courage to question and admire my unwavering faith in the human spirit. Granny is gone now, and so is her God. But in its place, I am left with a profound sense of what humanity can be. If we are to reach our human potential, it will not be the result of some external Superman. It will be the reward for accepting full responsibility for our evolving consciousness. If, however, the only way that some people can be humane is to act humanely in the name of God, I can accept that. But for the rest of us, we must take to heart the words of the Buddha. He said, be awake. Our grandmothers and other forebears taught us a great deal. But we must move beyond those teachers to a new awakening. That is our job. Just as that will be the job of our children to move beyond our thinking. It is called evolution. And that is our journey. Thank you.